Hello, and welcome to the War in the Pacific. It is the 27th of January, 1942, in the Wirraway versus Encircled play-by-mail campaign. And since Encircled has been on vacation on the beach for about a week, I thought I'd do a look at Japanese research and production for those people who are interested. No new term today. This is uh, essentially the same 26th of January turn. It's just the clock flipped over and it's the Japanese phase for orders input. So no new combat to show you today. Let's talk about Japanese research and production, uh, starting with aircraft, and then we'll go into some of the others. So first of all, I generally take a pretty modest approach to expanding my aircraft production early in the game. I want to make sure I maintain adequate supply levels and don't commit to a uh, building program that in the end I can't sustain because of how phase one operations in the Dutch East Indies play out. So you can, if capture of oil in the Dutch East Indies doesn't go well. It's primarily due to the randoms of the Gary Grigsby model. You can end up with a much more constrained outlook in terms of the availability of oil and eventually fuel to support your heavy industry, to support your aircraft production, or for that matter, shipbuilding, let alone operations of the Navy. So I usually don't make any major decisions until I've determined to what extent I've been able to capture the oil in the Dutch East Indies intact or not. And then, of course, oil in Burma, which is very exposed to enemy air attack, and any other oil that I might capture, uh, whether in India or elsewhere. Uh, those are those are important, but not on the same scale as the Dutch East Indies. So this is a preliminary look, still pending the fall of the oil in the Dutch East Indies. And I don't rush to do that. Many people do. I do not. As you may recall, I haven't attempted to take Balikpapan um, or uh, the oil at Brunei and Miri, and haven't attempted to take Palembang yet. Instead, I focus on removing the enemy air threat to these areas first, uh, and then take the oil when I can defend it. Because, of course, it's expensive to rebuild. It can be rebuilt, but it's expensive. And in the end game, when you're talking 1944 and 45, it's supply uh, that you need, and you'll regret any unnecessary expenditure of supply in the early game. So you always want to be conscious of how you're what you're building and how much supply it's costing, because that will lead you to regrets in the late game. So we don't know how this is going to play out yet. Um, so this is just a look at my early war uh, R&D and construction. Uh, R&D is pretty straightforward. It's aircraft construction that's more complicated in terms of how the game plays out. So let's take a look at R&D first. So it's relatively easy to get the A6M5 model of Zero. And remember, this is a PDU off game, so I have to manage not just the models I really would like to build, but all the models I have to get there in a timely fashion. And so, if you play PDU player defined upgrades on, your approach could be quite a bit more streamlined. But of course, the typical uh, build out the roofs in terms of R&D. Um, they'll rapidly get you to, you can then convert them directly to A6M5 without waste of supply or delay in R&D. Meanwhile, I have to research A6M3s in order to be able to then uh, get A6M3As and move my upgrade, uh, move along my upgrade path for most of my zero units. Um, we can take a look. I think we can find third coup pretty quickly here. So note, uh, third coup goes from A6M2 to A6 M3A to the M5. So I've got to get to the M3A. And if you remember your Japanese aircraft, the A6M3, um, sorry, I always have to, I always have trouble finding this conveniently. Your A6M3 upgrades to your A6 M3A. Nothing else does. So you've got to start off researching that A6M3 to get to the M3A, all before your M5s are ready. And, you can relatively easy with modest effort get your M5s by June or July of 42 with the engine bonus and just 4 to 6 research factories. So um, you got to target getting your M3As about the same time. So uh, July, August is a good target. And in order to do that, I got to get to my M3s first. So right now, I'm only committing what will eventually be a total of six, what is a total of 6 research factories to the A6 line. Um, I'll keep those 6 over time. Those will go on to the later versions of the zeros because in order to get the SAM, you have to get all the way through the zero line to get to the SAM. And the SAM is a strategic goal. It is when I say strategic, that's something that dramatically changes your ability to compete. And people will argue, about what is a strategic goal. Again, that's my definition. And getting the A7 M2 in 44 as early as possible is actually a strategic goal of my R&D program. That's both the SAM and the SAM-J. The Jill isn't particularly important, but have to have it to get to um, the Grace, and the Grace is an excellent aircraft. The Judy is an excellent aircraft, and you can get it quite early. Trying to get the Judy into 40, as early in 42 as possible uh, is another key goal. The Judy is such a dramatic upgrade to your carrier's striking ability over the Val, and eventually with the 1,000-pound bomb, they can wreck just about anything out there. You see Irvings as night fighters. Irving is um, a relatively useless aircraft other than as a night fighter. There's really nothing that the Babs can't do as well as essentially as well as Irving with only a single engine. But as a night fighter, it's one of your only effective naval night fighters. Just do the Jack for history. Uh, Jack's not a particularly useful aircraft, not a particularly awful one. Note that I haven't expanded all these to 30 yet. I watch my supply levels very closely, and I don't rush these airframes to get to size 30, which is typically the optimal size for an R&D factory. You're gonna in a PDU off game, you're gonna be flying Oscars, the uh, essentially the entire all 5 years or 4 years of the campaign, depending on how far it goes. Um, and so I want to get to the Oscar 3 and Oscar 4, really Oscar 4 as quickly as possible, uh, understanding that the Oscar is a utility aircraft. Um, it's it obviously has plenty of limitations to it, but the first key is getting to the Armored 2A, then 2B, then the 3 and the 4, and I'll keep that Oscar line chugging along until the Oscar 5, I'm sorry, 4 arrives, which will be a while, even with the engine bonus. Um, Kojo's in a EDU off game, and there aren't that many squadrons that can use it. It's an interceptor. Um, the game probably gives the Tojo is more effective because of speed than it's a decent airframe, but it is in the end an interceptor, short range interceptor, and there's only a small number of units that can upgrade to any of the Tojo line in a PDU off game, so it doesn't get the same emphasis that some people give it in PDU on games. Nick D, uh, decent, decent night fighter. Um, Helen's again, uh, game probably gives the Helen um, better ratings than the Japanese felt of it at the time, but uh, getting your few squadrons that upgrade to Helen's upgraded and the armored version is still useful. And I've got to get through the Helen line to get to the Peggy. Tony's I'm just doing for historical, and of course you do have a handful of Sentais that upgrade to the Tony, and the Tonys um, they don't get a lot of love, but they're a decent airframe except for their horrific reliability of the early models. Peggies are critical to having any true sort of offensive capability of the Japanese uh, Army Air Force in the mid game and late game. So quite lot of research effort into getting the Peggy. But as I pointed out, you got to get through the Helens for some of your squadrons too. Frank is a strategic goal, just an all-around great fighter. You can say I have more than 10 Frank factories working. George is another excellent aircraft, and you don't have as many squadrons that can convert to the George, anywhere near as many as the Frank. so it doesn't get the same level of effort of the Frank. Along with that, of course, you got to research your engines. You can see you've got three factories trying to get the Judy engines as early as possible. Uh, one chasing, uh, you know, the Kawasaki HA60 inline engine. The rest of the research, the 43 gets one factory. The 44 starts with one factory, but eventually I'll convert once the 45 is in production, I'll convert all these to getting the 44. You know, a lot of people aim to get to that 500 engine pool as quickly as possible. I think it's a reasonable goal, but just be aware that um, the the amount of heavy industry and supply you're spending for those throwaway engines that accelerate your research is pretty significant. You want to make sure to keep that in mind. I don't go crazy on any of my engine builds. And while I'm going to build the HA35 throughout the game, particularly for Oscars and other aircraft that use it, these other factories are eventually going to be switched to other engines with the corresponding supply costs. So I don't make them large. A single large factory for the ongoing production of the HA35 to support eventually just the Oscar line and others. In the short run, it's supporting a number of airframes, including the Zero. Um, that I'll keep slowly growing. Uh, but these others, I keep it modest size and eventually will switch over. Actual aircraft production for the early war, um, I aim for 150 zeros a month in the early war as I'm expanding my squadrons. Uh, you you've got quite a bit of demand for zeros early, and you need zeros, and the zero remains a very competitive aircraft for the first year of the war. So 150 is actually overbuilding for my losses uh, and my expansion goals, but uh, it's the decision I made here to get as many zeros as possible within budget in the early war, anticipating that Encircled would uh, put up a stiff defense. I'm going to jump and just look at aircraft losses for a moment. So the air wars generally turned uh, pretty significantly in my favor over the last month or so. Really had one rough turn. It was turn two, where I lost a number of aircraft, primarily uh, torpedo bombers, to uh, some pretty subtle, well thought out cap traps. But since then, um, we've avoided the cap traps and generally figured out his approach. So you can see a lot of Warhawk losses, some typical Dutch bomber losses, uh, lots of Buffalo losses, and I've lost 63 zeros, but uh, only 28 to air. Um, he's lost more Catalinas PBY5s than I've lost Sally's. So Sally's typically um, take pretty heavy losses, particularly these are almost all over Singapore. Uh, so I, I build about 50 Sallies a month. I've lost 41, so um, that's a sustainable pattern. These Nell losses, this was essentially the day 2 or day 3 cap traps. Other than that, Nell losses have been minimal. You can see the losses to the AVG. Um, Babs, I'm facing with Dynas. The Babs start taking pretty heavy air-to-air losses once the Allies get some decent fighters or dense fighters. So, while the Bab is a useful, reliable aircraft, it doesn't. Its survivability is modest at best once the Allies get their uh, their fighter cover up and running. And of course, once their second generation fighters come, the losses become unsustainable in Babs. Kates, I'm usually, we start off with no Kates in production, of course, so this is one of the first things you do. I don't want to overbuild Kates. I'm building about 27. Uh, I've lost 13 to air. And again, almost all those occurred in the first opening days of the campaign. Um, he's been pretty free. We've talked about this before about his use of his B-17s and really pretty attrited his B-17 forces. So that's good. Oscar losses in 1As have been very light. My Jakes are always an issue because you're trying to fill out Jake squadrons. Vals are a non-issue unless you misuse them, get them into a position where um, they're flying into heavy cap. All in all, pretty good. So my construction plan is based on that assessment of air losses. I perhaps I probably overreacted. I probably could have gotten away with some fewer um, zero build. Kate's is 41 in the pool, so that's plenty. Val's 27 in the pool, that's plenty. Jake, I'm still filling out and converting many squadrons to Jake, so I'll keep building Jakes for a while. Glenn's, uh, I'll convert this factory pretty soon, but I'm not building any of the engines. Usually I just uh, build all the Glens I can until I run out of engines, but I've lost very few so far, so I may shut that production down a little earlier. Peats, I need, you can see I've just recently chosen to expand my peat line as I use peats particularly training uh, naval aviators in sweep skills as patrol pilots and then pulling them over into my fighter squadrons. I think most people do the same. Petty losses have been modest. Uh, Mavis, there just aren't that many of them. Sally's, you can see I'm building 50 and I'm building 150 Oscars. Dinah's, I never have enough Dinah's early on. Tina's, I never have enough Tina's early on. So you can see I'm actually building more Tinas than I am Topsies. I'm still building the Thalias. Eventually, I'll convert that to another aircraft because there just aren't that many Thalia squadrons. Uh, Sonya losses have been modest so far, but that can change overnight. If he jumps some Sonyas where you least expect it, easy to lose 20 in a 20 in a single bite. So that's the current air construction um, and R&D air. Let's take take a look at ships. So you can see I've expanded naval shipyard construction and significantly reduced merchant shipyard construction. Um, I'm accelerating all the late war carriers, trying to get as many into late 43 as possible. Don't normally uh, halt Tayo. That was probably a click error last turn. I alternate normal and accelerated on Taiho um, based on how many points I have. Um, Again, the goal is to get her into late 43. So I just toggle this between normal and accelerated to maintain my naval shipyard balance. I think I halt Yamato until she comes out about ready with Musashi. The two big supers work well together, but just one or the other isn't an advantage. So I use slowdown in Yamato to allow me to accelerate Taiho, sorry, uh, to allow me to accelerate Taiho as much as possible. I generally turn off my on the merchant shipyard side. It's fiddly, but I generally just um, try to stop the the smaller stuff. Um, these are just points to the enemy. They're not really useful. You've got your merchant marine is generally adequate. Um, so I look for the standards um, and build those because eventually convert them. You can eventually convert them to Oilers and some of the. So here's a standard A. Definitely want all the standard A's um, and standard B, but not much else. In terms of armament, uh, I reduce my armament uh, pretty considerably from the starting point and convert some of that to vehicles. Uh, General aim for to have about 150. I want to make sure that uh, I can flesh out my armor, keep my armor units full size, and flesh out the armor regiments that begin arriving in about 6 months, but nothing outrageous. So significant reductions in armament growth in vehicles, uh, significant reductions in merchant shipyard, and reasonable growth in naval shipyard is my general approach to production. And again, it all depends on um, in the end, the assessment of how strong your economy in 42 and 43 is going to be based on the capture of the oil intact, your ability to expand heavy industry. Uh, I will generally expand heavy industry in the Dutch East Indies, anywhere near where I'm producing oil and fuel, and not expand it in the home islands. Of course, you could capture heavy industry in this, the area around Calcutta is particularly rich in heavy industry targets. So, it's an attractive way to expand your economy without expending supply. And again, I just want to emphasize that every 1,000 tons of supply you spend in 42 that isn't achieving an important objective, you'll rue in the later war. In terms of convoy operations, pretty simple stuff. You um, use as many of your small AKLs, the 1,500 tonners, etc., to go back and forth between Hokkaido and uh, usually using primarily Hokate as your port. They're just making a 2 hex run back and forth over and over again. You can use about 3 convoys of medium-sized ships running from Shikuka down to any of these ports along northern Honshu. And of course, there's a modest amount of oil you can get out of Shikuku. You actually have to import fuel into Sapporo to keep your heavy industry going. So you have to watch that. Just keep small tanker in one of your northern Honshu ports and run the fuel to Hokkaido as you need it. Remember, when you're setting up these convoys, don't draw from multiple ports unless you've got a really good reason to, because uh, the game engine gets a little confused. You can see I've got almost 1 million resources pooled here at Hakate, Hak- Hakodate, yes. Um, that's where I want them. And there's no rush to get those out. Uh, so they've dropped a little. I just monitor that and add a few more transports if it's growing, or reduce some if it's dropping rapidly. But in general, there's no rush to the uh, get these from Hokkaido to Honshu. Just a steady flow, and of course, use Fuson to move the resources from Korea and Manchuria, expanding the Fuson port, and just the 2 hex run to Shimonoseki. Uh, Remember to mine and put ACM at Toshima, so enemy submarines really can't enter the Sea of Japan this way. Uh, Mines here limit their ability to enter the Sea of Japan this way, so their only real access point is here. And you can put ASW in the shallow water, so making the Sea of Japan very tricky for them to get at, and very tricky for submarines to get at your resource convoys. Uh, Oil, of course, is trickier because you've got to make the run from Shikuka in the exposed area here, which is where the submarines love to lurk. So you want to make sure you get uh, air ASW operating in this area as early as possible with skilled crews. And eventually you have to run the oil back from the Dutch East Indies. There's a variety of ways to do that. It depends on partly what the enemy chooses to attempt to interdict, we'll deal with that when we capture the oil. Um, only other thing to think about, shouldn't say only thing, one other thing to think about is the enemy certainly has the ability to run surface raiders into uh, this area and try to catch your, whether it's your tankers or your transports. Um, you want to make sure, you've got the area adequately covered by naval air search aircraft, but particularly when he gets Fletchers, they can race in from 20 hexes, um, hit you, and then try to escape. So you do have to watch that and have a force capable of attacking those ships and destroying them. So he gets out of the habit of doing that. Uh, um, Vowels are, useful for that purpose. Um, as are heavy fighters on low nav and light cruisers as a quick reaction force are all good ways to um, make it very expensive for him to send destroyers in on those snatch and grab operations. Anyway, that's a quick look at industry research, and I look forward to our next chance to talk.